Hi, welcome back. So in this section, we are going to talk about joins and blending of data. So let's start by opening a new data source and let's use the same Excel that we have been using. Because it's a new section, I'm just opening a new one. So I'm connecting to Excel. I'm opening the same sample store dataset. So till now we have been working only with one set of data, which is the orders. So, but we also have some returns. So let's go back to the Excel that we were sent and let's kind of try to look at what's going on here in the returns. So each of my orders column has something called customer ID and order date. Let me see if it has order ID. So it has something called order ID, and as you can see here, we have about 9,995 records. Let's go to returns. Looks like we have something called returns and we have something called the return status and we have the ordered IDs for the returned items. So looks like of the 9,000 records we have close to 297 which were returned, and looks like the order ID is what is tying these two together. So let's now go back and try to see if I can match based on order ID. So the idea in this first one is where we are going to talk about joins is to see if I can get all the returns or get some statistics around the returns. So if you look at the data right now, we are basically looking at all the returned items and also all the orders. So let's see if we have the return data statistics. Looks like we have some data for returned. So looks like we have in the total orders, we have some data which is kind of returned. So let's now try to see the data. So when I click this one, it basically tells me which column is coming from where, so that I can kind of see if it is valid. So the other interesting thing that I have here is how did Tableau know that it had to match on the order ID between these two tables, or how was Tableau aware of that? So let's go back and kind of click. If you see, these are two circles. Like this concept comes from sets in mathematics, where we have two sets, and in this case, if you see, we are only displaying data where we have intersected. So let's click on that and see what happens. So if you see, it is saying order ID from my first column is matching to the order ID from returns. So this is a really interesting one. So what we are trying to tell here is, if we have one record in order ID, then we are going to check for the corresponding record in returns and see if the data exists. If the data exists in both of them, that's only when we are going to return the data. So if you look at the data right now, the first orders that we had initially, orders 1 to 18, were not returned. So you don't see them because we selected inner join, which means data should be available in both of the data sets. In this case, my data set number 1 is orders, data set number 2 is returns. So why don't we go to my sheet and quickly do some analytics and see whether the data I got is correct or not. So first, if you see, there is a difference in the sense that whenever I have my returns, I have columns from returns that I can still use as measures, but at the same time I have columns from orders from which I have been having for a while now. So let me kind of look at the number of records. Let's say I take the order ID. I don't need the order ID. I'm saying that I want to see how many records have been returned. If the return value is S, I basically want to see the record counts for how many of them have been returned. So let me go for a graphical view. So looks like 800 records have been returned. So but when you look at the Excel, let's see how many have been returned here. If you look at the Excel, we only have 297 orders which are returned, but when we look at Tableau, we see 800 of them returned. So what's happening here? We will talk about that in much detail in our next section, where we will talk about multiple matches. But what we are trying to see here is we are trying to look at whether the item was returned or not. So maybe you can see based on the order date right there. So in 2011, looks like we had 400 orders that have, like 151 orders that have been returned, and in 12 basically you can get a high level view, or you can even remove the return, because we already are doing an inner join in the source, and we can see how many records have been returned as time goes on. And also, if you see the total sale value of the returned items, so we can see that in total we have about $75,000 worth of sales that have been returned in 2014, and it has been increasing as time went on. So this kind of is what we are trying to do here, is joining the data across multiple years and trying to identify where most of the sales or where most of the returns are coming from. So let's try to see if we can add some category data right there to see where the number of details or number of data is basically coming from. So let's remove the measures, and we, as I said earlier, we have the same properties. So let's say let's clear off everything, and let's start off from in a new sheet where we are going to look at by category what are the order dates. So these are the different categories, and let me see about the total dollar value of the sales that have been returned, and let's add some order date clause as well, so that we know what we are returning or how much we are returning. Let's go back. So if you look at this, in 2011 we had a net returns of about 8,600, and in 2014 looks like we had a net return about 21,000. So looks like if you do a quick table calculation right there, you can just click that and say quick table calculation, you are looking at percentile total. So if you look at it, looks like we have been our percentage of returns have been increasing as time went on. So this is kind of what we are trying to look at, is how many of the total have been returned. But the main thing that we need to look at here is the type of the join that we are using is an inner join, which basically means that every order that has a return is in my data extract. Now let me click on that and try to see if I can change it to a left outer join. What do I mean by a left outer join is, I want every record in my left table, which is my order in this case, and I want all the matching records from my right table. So in this case, if you think about it logically, for every left outer join, for every order, there can be a return, but every return should at least at some point in its life be an order. So let me click on the left outer join and see what happens. So right now, if you see, we have all the earlier we didn't have orders from 1 to 18, but right now you see all those orders coming back. So let's go back to the data sheet and see what happens when we kind of generate a new metric. So in this case, because we are doing the left outer join, let me see how many, let me go back and go to the category, and next pull the total sales. So I have total sales, and now let me see what are the returned, whether the orders were returned or not, and see. So there are two values. So in this case, if you can see, what happened was, why am I seeing a null value here is because you can say edit alias rather than null, I would say no. So what I'm basically doing is I'm saying whether it has been returned or not. So in this case, what basically we are trying to do is, whenever there is not a match between my order and a return, which means, let me go back to the data source and show you. So for example, and for the first order, we know that it was not returned. So let's go and see what happens to the return value. So if you look at this, the return value is null because this order was not returned, which means the return in the returns tab, data was not matched to this record. So now let's go down and go to this record where it says it was returned. So what do we mean by it was returned? It means that there is a match between my source table and my target and the other join table, in this case, which is returned. So this, because this record was returned, the total sale value that is available right here is part of the return value. So in this case, for all the furniture across all years, looks like we have about, in 682,000 we have about 59,000 of them returned, which is not really bad. So we know how much of the data is totally returned at this point. So this is very helpful, especially when we have multiple joins. So let's try to see if we can add one more join. So if you remember in people, when I just drag people, so there is one more join between order and people. So this is just, I wanted to make sure that you guys can see, so that we have multiple joins possible. So in this case, what we are basically trying to do is, in people, we know like we have south, east and west and stuff in the Excel that we initially talked about. So let's basically look at that. So what we are trying to do is, we have the person whoever is responsible, and then we have the region to which they are responsible. So now we have the name of the person, so that we can generate the reports accordingly. So if you see between orders and people, we have a left outer join, we have an inner join where we are taking the region from my orders table and matching it to the regions from my people. So let's go to and add a new sheet, and if you see here, there is a person. So let's just drag the person and also sale. So just based on the data we had, where we had the orders data and then trying to drag in the sale, we are now able to just not say south, east, west, but we are also able to give the region manager's name, so that it can be more beneficial and more useful. As you can see right now, we know how much sale they are making, and if you can add profit to the mix, so now we can easily tell that Anna has been producing really great profit for overall, because the sale is high and stuff like that. So it is really amazing, to see how the data changes as we add more joins. So we will in our so this concludes kind of how we kind of join the data. Before I conclude, let me quickly talk about, we talked about inner join, we talked about left outer join. The reason the right one is not available is because every record, right outer join is very similar to left outer join. The only difference is, in this case, every record in the right table, or in this case, for example, people, will be appearing in the result set, and the matching records from my left table will be appearing. In this case, it is not highlighted because every record from people is having a corresponding match. So the right outer join does not make any sense in this case. Full outer join is where you want everything from all the data sets, which means every record from your left table, every record from your right table, and every matching record. That is what is called a full outer join. So this is joins are very powerful, especially when you have data that you want to mix and match and analyze. This is something very useful, especially when you have organization where you have customer information coming from some one place, and you have finance information like the customer details coming from other place, and you have product information, and all of them getting tied to each other. So that's where we use joins, and Tableau does great work, especially using this kind of visualization on kind of knowing what kind of join we are going to use, and it's very visual. So this is really helpful. So I would encourage you to go ahead and explore different join conditions. I would say you can go ahead and create some Excel data and also play with it and see how the results are returned, so that they are very useful. Thank you.